The Atlantic is a vast, indifferent graveyard. To look at its surface is to see a void. Yet between 1939 and 1945, it was the most critical artery of the human world. It was a cold, three-dimensional chess game played across millions of square miles of salt water. If this artery were severed, the heart of the Allied resistance would simply stop beating. Winston Churchill would later confess that the only thing that truly terrified him during the long years of struggle was the U-boat peril. It was an invisible threat, a systemic suffocation that didn't rely on the theatrics of Blitzkrieg or the firestorms of Dresden. It relied on the slow, methodical starvation of an island nation. To understand the Battle of the Atlantic is to understand how close the world came to a very different ending. The prelude to this catastrophe began not in the shipyards of Kiel, but in the humiliations of 1918. The Treaty of Versailles had attempted to castrate the German Navy, forbidding the construction of submarines. But resentment is a powerful engine for innovation. Under the guise of research in foreign ports and the clandestine development of V-series prototypes, the German Naval Command, led by the visionary Karl Dönitz, prepared for a war they knew was coming. Dönitz was a man obsessed with a single metric: tonnage. He believed that if his boats could sink 700,000 tons of Allied shipping per month, the British Empire would collapse within a year. He did not need a grand fleet of battleships. He needed 300 gray wolves, capable of operating in packs to overwhelm the defenses of a convoy. When war broke out in September 1939, the German U-boat arm was actually underprepared. They had only 57 boats, and of those, only 27 were capable of reaching the Atlantic. Yet, the systemic failures of the British Admiralty provided the Germans with an opening they never should have had. The British, blinded by the memories of Jutland, still believed in the supremacy of the capital ship. They viewed the submarine as a nuisance, not a strategic existential threat. This arrogance led to the first great failure: the delay of the convoy system. Despite the lessons of the First World War, the Admiralty initially hesitated to group merchant ships together. They feared it would create larger targets. They failed to realize that the ocean is too big to search, but a convoy is a concentrated defense that forces the predator to come to the hunter. As the happy time began in 1940, U-boat commanders like Prien, Schepke, and Kretschmer became national heroes in Germany. They operated with a chilling efficiency, often surfacing in the middle of a convoy at night to fire their torpedoes at point-blank range. The British escorts, equipped with primitive ASDIC, an early form of sonar, were often helpless. A SDIC worked poorly in the turbulent wakes of ships and was useless against a U-boat that remained on the surface. The fall of France in the summer of 1940 changed the geography of the war overnight. The U-boats no longer had to transit the dangerous North Sea and the English Channel. They gained massive concrete bunkers in Lorient, Brest, and Saint-Nazaire. They were now sitting on the doorstep of the Atlantic, their reach extended by thousands of miles. The noose was tightening, and the systemic fragility of the British supply line was laid despair. But the true tactical disaster was yet to come, and it would originate from the West. In early 1942, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States entered the war. One might assume this would bring immediate relief to the Atlantic. Instead, it brought a slaughter known as the Second Happy Time, or Operation Paukenschlag. Admiral Ernest J. King, the American chief of naval operations, harbored a deep-seated distrust of the British. He ignored their hard-won experience and refused to implement convoys along the American eastern seaboard. For months, U-boats sat just offshore, silhouetting American merchant ships against the brightly lit neon signs of Atlantic City and Miami. The American government refused to order a blackout, fearing it would hurt the tourism industry. It was a systemic failure of the highest order. Thousands of sailors died within sight of the American coast, while the Navy watched from the shore. The carnage was so absolute that U-boat commanders joked about the shooting gallery. It was only when the losses became mathematically unsustainable that the Americans finally adopted the convoy system, proving once again that blood is often the only currency that buys military reform. As the war moved into 1943, the conflict entered its most brutal phase. The battle transitioned from a test of courage to a war of science and industrial capacity. The mid-Atlantic Gap, a vast stretch of ocean beyond the reach of land-based aircraft, became the primary killing ground. Here, in the Black Pit, the U-boats reigned supreme. The systemic response to this gap was the development of very long-range aircraft and the introduction of the escort carrier. But the unsung heroes of this era were not just the pilots, but the mathematicians and analysts at Bletchley Park. The breaking of the German naval enigma, known as Shark, allowed the Admiralty to route convoys around known U-boat patrol lines. It was a silent, invisible victory, won with pencil and paper rather than depth charges. This technological war was a constant cycle of measure and countermeasure. When the Germans introduced the Metox receiver to detect Allied radar, the Allies developed centimetric radar, which the German sensors could not see. When the U-boats began staying on the surface to fight it out with anti-aircraft guns, the Allies introduced the Lee Light, a powerful searchlight that illuminated the boats at night just seconds before the depth charges fell. Amidst this high-tech duel, the human cost was staggering. The merchant mariners were the true unsung heroes of the Atlantic. These were civilians, men as young as 15 and as old as 70, who went to sea in slow, rust-streaked tankers and freighters. They carried the oil, the grain, and the steel that kept the war machine alive. If they were sunk, they often died in freezing water or burning oil. Their mortality rate was higher than almost any branch of the armed forces. Yet they returned to sea time and time again. On the other side of the Atlantic, the U-boat crews were living a nightmare of their own. Life inside a Type 7 U-boat was a claustrophobic existence of foul air, rotting food, and the constant smell of diesel and unwashed bodies. When a depth charge exploded nearby, the pressure would pop rivets like bullets and shatter the glass of the gauges. For a U-boat sailor, the ocean was not a battlefield. It was a potential steel coffin. The turning point finally arrived in May 1943, a month the German Navy would come to call Black May. The convergence of new technologies, better training, and the closing of the air gap resulted in the destruction of 41 U-boats in a single month. Dönitz, realizing the slaughter was no longer sustainable, withdrew his forces from the North Atlantic. The hunters had become the hunted. The final years of the battle were a tragic, grinding conclusion. The Germans introduced the snorkel and the acoustic torpedo, but it was too little, too late. The Allied industrial machine, led by the American Liberty ships, was launching vessels faster than the U-boats could sink them. The logistical war had been won, but the dying continued until the very last day of the conflict. When the war ended, the statistics revealed the horrific scale of the struggle. Over 3,500 merchant ships and 175 Allied warships lay at the bottom of the ocean. On the German side, the cost was even more concentrated. Of the 40,000 men who served in the U-boat arm, 30,000 never returned. It was the highest casualty rate of any military unit in history. The historical, philosophical takeaway of the Battle of the Atlantic is a sobering reflection on the nature of modern war. It was not a battle of individual glory or grand maneuvers, but a battle of systems. It proved that in a global conflict, the ability to protect a supply line is more important than the ability to win a single engagement. It was a war of attrition, where the most important weapon was not the torpedo, but the calculator and the shipyard. The Atlantic remains today as it was then, vast, deep, and silent. Beneath its waves lie the remains of thousands of ships and tens of thousands of men, a submerged monument to the fragility of civilization. Their struggle reminds us that the world we know is built upon the courage of those willing to traverse the darkness, and that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones we cannot see until it is too late. The gray wolves are gone, their steel hides rusted and reclaimed by the salt. The convoys no longer sail in fear of the night. But the echoes of the depth charges still resonate in the halls of history, a haunting reminder that the price of freedom is often paid in the coldest, deepest reaches of the earth. The sea does not remember. It does not mourn. It only waits, a restless witness to the time when the fate of the world hung by a single fraying thread of merchant steel. In the end, the Battle of the Atlantic was not just a naval campaign. It was the ultimate test of human endurance against the machine. It was the place where the industrial age met the primordial ocean, and where the courage of the common sailor proved to be the only thing stronger than the pressure of the deep. We look to the horizon and see only water, but history sees the ghosts of 1,000 ships, still sailing toward a peace they would never live to see. The story of the Atlantic is the story of us, of our capacity for destruction, our brilliance in innovation, and our quiet, stubborn refusal to be starved into submission. It is a story written in oil and salt, a narrative that will remain as long as the tides continue to pull at the shores of the world we fought so hard to save. And so the waves close over the past. The silence returns to the black pit. The war is over, but the ocean remains, keeping its secrets, guarding its dead, and reminding us that even the greatest empires are but specks of foam upon the surface of an infinite, uncaring sea. This was the Battle of the Atlantic. The longest battle, the hardest victory, the final cold frontier of the Second World War.
Void of indifferent salt and foam, the critical artery that carries the empire home. Churchill's shadow wakes in the terror of the night, an invisible suffocation, a ghost beyond the sight. 300 grey wolves under Dönitz's command, to starve an island nation, to crush the stubborn land. From concrete bunkers on the bleeding coast of France, the pack is gathering to lead the deadly dance. No convoy system, the Admiralty blind, leaving the rust-streaked tankers far behind. Surfacing at midnight, shadows in the wake. The ocean is a gallery of lives they're going to take. Oh, look into the black pit, the graveyard of steel. The cold Atlantic turning the historical wheel. Through burning oil and the freezing deep, the merchant mariners are falling asleep. No flags of glory, no cinematic cry, just iron coffins where the young men die. Operation Paukenschlag, the neon lights burn bright. Tourism and arrogance silhouetted in the night. King's bitter failure on the western shore, a slaughterhouse of shipping in a modern war. But Bletchley Park is riding a silent paper shield. The enigma is broken on a mathematical field. From centimetric radar to the sudden late light, the hunters are hunted in the middle of the night. Turning of the tide, 41 wolves buried where the monster Just iron coffins where the young men die. The sea does not remember, the water doesn't mourn. The thread of merchant steel is frayed and torn. Silence returns to the infinite deep. Rest well, grave.